The man on second is going overseas. We are global here on the YouTube channel, Man on Second. It is with our delight. We're going all the way to Leeds, England to meet with Peter Pratt. For our audience who doesn't know Peter Pratt, he is about as rabid a baseball fan as there is. He's been a Marlins podcaster for several years. I've known Peter since 2020, oddly, the COVID year. Kind of introduced a different way of covering baseball in major leagues. I was covering the Marlins. We went to Zoom calls, and next thing you know, the social media end of it and the podcast end all intersected. And with great delight, I'm going to bring in the madman across the water, Mr. Peter Pratt. Peter, I hope you got the musical reference to that one.
Yeah, for sure. Smoking Joe. I'm delighted to be on. And it's funny, right? Reflecting back to that 2020 year, because that's the first time that we, I guess, properly met. And man, what a weird time to be covering baseball, but what a fun time. I mean, that was for me. I thought that was just a really great opportunity, actually, for people that maybe aren't local to the Marlins to be able to cover the Marlins, via the Zoom calls. I actually thought it worked really well. So yeah, but it's great to be on this show. This feels different. Normally, you're on my shows.
I'm on your show, yeah. So we kind of flipped the script, and Peter, this 2020 oddly was, I did MLB.com for 18 years on the Marlins beat, and 2020 was kind of the end of it, and I kind of felt it would be. But before we dive into this conversation with Peter, we're going to talk. We're going to talk the state of baseball. We're going to get a different perspective because we're getting Peter's, like I said, is a rabid baseball fan. We're going to, we're trying to become an international sport. Growing the game of baseball is a big reason why Man on Second, my alter ego. I started this up after I took early retirement from MLB.com back in 2021 after the 20 season. And that's the beauty of this channel. It's a lot of it's grassroots. I introduced it a few months ago, the podcast wing of it. And I think, we're going to have a really fun baseball conversation with Peter Pratt. But before we dive really deeply in, please like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff, notifications. You have to say all that stuff, Peter, right? To kind of stay hip with staying in the algorithms as well. But again, Peter, my background there, being on the Marlins all those years. And 2020 up until with 2 weeks ago in spring training is when COVID came in full bloom, and that's when it got stopped. I was kind of thinking, because I've been on the Marlins a long time, was almost going to even ask to transition off the beat, but stay with the company. And then everything changed when everything shut down, priorities changed. Fortunately, I was blessed enough to work at a company that, we didn't really feel the hardship of it. They didn't skip a paycheck. We didn't do anything MLB.com. What happened was we didn't travel. So I honestly think my travel budget basically paid my salary. But after that kind of ended, I kind of sensed that isn't a very sustainable model for a multi-billion-dollar business like baseball. And I had turned 60 in September of that year, and it was a good opportunity to early retire. And when I did that, I was like, look, I can do the Marlins thing. And I kind of figured out where is this going. I wanted to stay. I was young enough to stay active, want to be a little entrepreneurial. And you have such a great personality and a way of, everyone loves you. You have a great way of connecting with people. You went the podcast way, and nobody really likes me. I'm a little gruffer on social media, but the people who don't like me, they like me a lot, and they kind of get it. But I see this as a really fun way, in my small way, to give back to the sport and help grow it, especially at the grassroots level, where I am making an impact with exposure for a lot of these high school kids and, getting them either college opportunities, providing videos of them, while still also being a card-carrying BBWA member and keeping an eye on the big league clubs and the league as much as possible. But that's my path, Peter, for those who may not have known all this particulars. How did Peter Pratt become a baseball junkie in England?
I know how and why the Marlins? These are two interconnected questions, but this story I think is familiar to a lot of British people that travel to the States and discover American sports. And for me, that's how I discovered baseball. My brother actually lives and has moved to St. Louis. So he moved over there, I don't know, like 2012, 2013, somewhere in that range, right? So he moves to St. Louis. I went out to visit him in 2015, and he took me to Busch to watch a baseball game. It was a day game. They were playing the Braves. I didn't know the Cardinals. I didn't know this is my first experience of baseball ever. I'd never watched anything really before.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to the game. Granted, we were hungover to hell after the night before, a massive party at his house, which was fun, and I was really hungover. And you know the drill. As soon as you're hungover and you have 2 beers, you're instantly alive. And I was like, man, baseball's amazing. And we sat there all day just drinking beers, and it was a glorious day. And I was like, man, that was fun. I had no idea what was happening on the field. Not one thing. My brother's not really a baseball guy either. He just went for the beers. So, you know, it stuck with me thinking, I think there could be something there. Fast forward a year, we then travel, me and my wife and her family travel to Miami for a holiday. And I said, listen, they've got a team in Miami. Let's go to the baseball. And so we did. And in advance of that, I did start to prepare a little bit, thinking, okay, we're going to watch the Marlins. Like, who are the players? Like, I'm starting to try and get my head into that. Anyway, we turn up, we watch the game, and I thought, I'm in. I'm going to give this a go. I'm just going to buy a Marlins jersey in the ballpark, put it on, standing on the back. I went, this is the jersey. This is the team. I'm going to follow baseball from now on. So that was 2016. Again, Joe, this is the funny thing of like a British person, that baseball isn't in your culture. Yeah. Who teaches you the rules of baseball if you don't have family members or people around you to guide you like as you would do as a kid? Like, I didn't have anyone to teach me. So I had to basically watch and try to work it out, which is kind of interesting because no one's there to guide you. But nevertheless, I was all in on the Marlins at that point, because I feel like if you're going to follow a sport, you need a team. You need like some skin in the game, I think, to like
Absolutely.
make it. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, right, let's just go with the Marlins, because I felt, for some reason, I didn't feel a connection with the Cardinals. I don't know why. I should have done. But for the Marlins, I was like, okay, let's go with these guys. Stanton was there at the time. And on the day I went to watch that the only game I've ever seen live of the Marlins, Jose Fernandez was pitching. I didn't know who Jose was at that time, but coincidentally, Jose was pitching. Stanton hit a home run. Like, it was that 2016, 2017 era of Marlins baseball where probably for you, Joe, at that point, and a lot of Marlins fans, they'd been thinking, this team's close. Like, the window could be opening soon here, obviously. And so, you know, that meant nothing to me at that time. But I committed to the Marlins. My son was then born in 2017, April of 2017. And at that point, with these kids, these newborns, they wake up through the night all the time. So I said, you know what? I'm going to start watching baseball games through the night. When my son wakes up, get him on the arm, get the bottle in, and fire up the baseball and watch it live on, you know, the MLB.TV app or whatever it might be. And that was 2017 was like the year I really heavily got into Marlins baseball, was tracking like every game. I was watching pretty much every
Stanton
game.
Hit 59 homers. He was the MVP. You know, obviously Absolutely. Jose's passing in September of 2016. The Marlins were kind of known, you know, for a tragedy, sadly, with, you know, one of the darkest days, obviously, that you'll ever experience when you're embedded with the team, the passing of Jose. But your path into the sport is very fascinating, Peter, and it's very genuine and authentic. And that, to me, obviously, is when sports is at its best. And that's how, like you say, how do you know the game when you're from another country? It's not part of your culture. When someone like me, who was born in 1960, when I was my first baseball hero, just for reference points, was Mickey Mantle. And really, I don't recall anything in life really before 1968. And Mickey Mantle retired in 68. So it wasn't even like I saw Mickey Mantle play, because he retired in 68. He was always hurt. And I may have on TV seen him, you know, limp around the field a little because he had all these knee injuries. But it was an iconic name. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then Tom Seaver, the Mets, because I grew up in New York, and Seaver's above my shoulder there.
Yeah, you got it.
My son, who's a big baseball guy, he my childhood when Tom Seaver in 1969, I actually went to Shea Stadium when he won his 20th game that year. I was 9 years old, and the Mets won the World Series. It was something magical. I remember being in elementary school, and this is a different world right now, Peter, because back then the World Series was played in the afternoon. I
Yeah.
remember being, the bus to take us back home. We were in these little lines. We had to sit down, and it would be like fifth grade, fourth grade, third grade. You'd be in these lines, and we were in like the cafeteria, and it had like a stage because that's where they'd have like the holiday plays would be up there. And they wheeled out this old black and white TV and put the Mets game on, and against the Orioles in the World Series, and we couldn't wait for the bus to get back so I could run home, because we didn't have the internet or anything on our phone. We had no idea what's going to the score. So you're running home trying to see. But again, you knew the game and from the players, and obviously then you would hear Hank Aaron was playing those days. Willie Mays was kind of in this last few years, those type of people. But the announcers, it was part of your summer. It was part of your the culture where. And in New York, having all the sports teams and multiple teams with the Yankees and the Mets, you just kind of had TV on all the time, and the announcers taught you the game, and then your eyeballs taught you the game, and that's kind of how many generations have learned baseball.
Yeah. And it's funny because now that I'm getting into it, I start to then try and my son's 7 now, so I try to educate him on baseball, and it's funny. How, because baseball in its most simplistic form is like super easy. It should be, it's super simple to explain the basic concepts, but actually the amount of the layers of nuance that are within baseball are incredible. And it does either, to your point, you either have to watch every game and the announcers help educate you, or, someone teaches you. And in this case, we're trying to fast track my son to understanding like what the hell's going on, so he can enjoy it too. But yeah, it's a little bit of it's one of them things that you don't really think of maybe, but being an international fan, you don't have the education around you to help you understand what you're seeing to a point. Like I remember like an infield fly, I think is like a perfect example of that, where there's no way of understanding what the hell is going on with an infield fly unless someone specifically call that out to you. And don't get me started on a balk. I mean, I don't even know what a balk is now. So
a balk almost is, if it doesn't look right, it's probably a balk.
There you go.
So some sort of weird movement by the pitcher, it's probably a balk. Some sort of hesitation, herky-jerky motion. But the infield fly, it's funny because I've always mastered the infield fly. So I'll be at youth games or high school games, and there'll be first and third and one out and a pop fly, and people go infield fly, and I'm like, it's got to be first and second or bases loaded. First and third doesn't work. And there was a game I even asked one of the coaches. I was there because I'm videoing, and all of a sudden there was an infield fly situation, and there was a pop up, and the infield with I think it was first and second with no outs or one out, which is infield fly, and a pop up to the shortstop. And now, granted, it's fall ball, and it's really the umpires are only there just to kind of give there's one umpire. For a regular high school game, you have two, probably three. So you have one on the bases, one behind the plate. If it's a more important game, they'd have 3 umpires. And when you get to state, they have 4, like a big leaguer type thing. But just to play a scrimmage where sometimes they'll just roll an inning over, meaning if a pitcher's thrown enough pitches, they, hey, we just get them out of there. We're not worried about the result. They just kind of worry about getting repetitions for the guys. But there was an infield fly situation, and I even asked the coach, I didn't see the umpire signal infield fly. It was but that matters. And you know what, Peter? You know why that matters to me probably more than the regular person say, "Oh, what's the big difference?" Is it's the game can't be lost in it. And that's where kind of my beef with, and I'm not anti-analytics. I'm anti it being the sole driving force, taking the human element and all of that's made baseball, and how we look at baseball players and just reducing them to a metric that fits a narrative. And that's really my beef with it. And I see it in to be honest with you, a lot of these younger players, they don't like it either. They just want to play, but they're seeing, oh, well, some of these guys are good enough to be D1 players. Oh, your exit velocity is not enough. And I'm like, the guy's a great player. He's going to be, he'll grow into more exit velocity. He's also 16 years old playing up. It's like you can't just define everything on a metric.
No, I'm with you.
Teach your 7-year-old,
Well, this is it. This is, and I understand an aspect of that, right? Like there's stats that are indicators, but I think it's just an indicator. It isn't the only indicator. And I like, for me, I watch baseball and I buy things with my eyes. Like if I think someone's good, my eyes are going to tell me that they're good. Or if I think they're not that good, my eyes are going to tell me that. I don't know, that's just the way that I am, to be honest with you. I make my own opinions rather than using statistical analysis to be the only opinion. So this is a polarizing topic, I'm sure, and one that everyone has a different view on. My own view is I'm happy with a blend of the two, but I'm more weighted as a fan, I'm going to see something and I'm going to form my own opinion on that. And that's just the way I go about it.
Yeah. And you know what? That's the thing, too. It's like you could be data informed, but not necessarily be data driven. And we've seen it. You probably remember when the Marlins got Jonathan Villar. Everyone was crowing, oh, they got Jonathan Villar from Baltimore. He had a 4 WAR the year before. And then comes to the Marlins. He was like either a, no WAR or negative WAR. He wasn't remotely that player. There were years where, Chris Taylor was, and I love Chris Taylor. I think he's a very valuable player for the Dodgers. You know what I mean? That this year wasn't as much, but we've seen Chris Taylor. He comes up clutch. He does a lot of really good things. Can play everywhere. He was like top 10 nationally position player. He's not that. He's a really good player, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like people can sit around and go, oh, well, Stanton's WAR may not have been. It's freaking Stanton. It's like this guy tilts the field. We've had guys like Matt Chapman had a bad year WAR-wise. Luis Arias, because the guy's winning a batting title with a ripped up thumb and everyone's banging on him because of his WAR. It's like, well, he's only probably the second best team in baseball. The Padres probably were. When you get down to it, they're probably better than the Yankees. If they played in the World Series, they probably and they took the Dodgers all the way, had the Dodgers on the brink of elimination. And so I look at it more as roster construction, and I'm well aware, and as you know, I'm a big Arias fan, and I also know his limitations, but I also know his track record. And that's why when we get so wrapped up in one player has a good year, and that's great for that player, but it comes down to kind of more of the traditional scouting on players is this guy kind of profiles as a role player. Not everyone's up to being, you could be the best player on a bad team and then go to a good team and you hit ninth or eighth.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's just how it works.
Yeah, agreed. Luis Arias in particular, there's been a lot of discourse around him since he was traded, more so since he was traded, to be honest with you. Within the types of guys I engage with on Twitter anyway, there's been a lot of talk about Arias. But I mean, think back to 2023, just how immense Arias was for the Marlins and how pivotal he was. And equally, how the Padres were really scuttling pre-Arias. I know they made the deal pretty early on, but like the Padres morphed into the second best team. And Arias was a big part of that. And he's won 3 titles in a row. Each year, he's made the team better that he's gone to, in my opinion. And so, for me, that's an indication of Luis Arias, the player, and what he brings.
And what did Luis bring to the Marlins in 23? Skip obviously did a great job, well-deserving of manager of the year. The Marlins weren't supposed to be what they were. They went to the playoffs, won a bunch of one-run games, which kind of speaks to the way he could connect with players to come through in those situations, even with a negative run differential. We get all of that. Is it sustainable? Well, you never know. When you break it up, you never know. You could say it isn't, but you didn't give any continuity a chance, and you were assuming. But what Arias brought was, and I'm going to parlay it to what Juan Pierre meant back in 2003, was he brought he helped Skip win that manager of the year. And what I mean by that is the manager's job is obviously get the most out of the players, make sure the clubhouse isn't beating each other up, make sure everyone gets along, make sure that, you kind of press the right buttons, if you got to bench a guy for a little while, how you could not lose that player, and how you can kind of read the room of when you need to be hard on the team, soft on the team, that all that equates. But what Luis did was he brought a level of professionalism and work ethic that when he's in there early working, all of a sudden Jazz is in there early working. All of a sudden, a lot of players are in there early working. They just follow. It works for him. I'm also going to do this. And I mentioned Juan Pierre because back in my first year on the Marlins was 2002. My first 03, obviously, they win the World Series. They bring in Juan Pierre in 03. Spring training up in Jupiter. That was the first year of spring training in Jupiter. In 2002, they were still in Vieira. So, it was a little bit different. Torborg was managing 03. Even though Torborg did spring training, Jack McKeon came in May, and the rest became history. They go on win the World Series. Well, Juan Pierre comes over from the Colorado Rockies. In Colorado, he was teammates with Larry Walker, Todd Helton, two Hall of Famers, and guys like that. And those guys just and back, Colorado being Hitters Park, those guys hit all the time. So they got there early. Spring training kind of in Marlins land in that 2002, 2003 era. Players, if you had to be on the field at 9, were on the field at 9. If you had to be at the clubhouse at 8 by 8:15 to get dressed and check in, they were at the clubhouse at 8:15. Juan Pierre was there 6:45. There's there's hitting in the batting cage. Juan Pierre was there at 6:30. He was in the batting cages at 6:45. And he was the first guy on the field. He was doing work and then going in and showering up at 8, and then doing what he has to do and get ready for the official practices, getting on the field about 9, stretch and get ready for a spring training game at 1. Well, what happened when Juan Pierre went in there at 6:45? Next thing you know, half the team is in there at 6:45.
Yeah.
And you created just it's one thing to do stuff when the coaches are all there. It's another thing to do stuff on your own and create your own kind of culture. Doesn't work for everyone. Some people, your body can break down. Juan Pierre, being a guy without power, but was a speed defense and has to get on base, he had to always outwork people because he wasn't physically gifted enough to take it for granted. So that worked for him. And in his work ethic kind of rubbed off on half the clubhouse, and that 03 team, was a magical team, won the World Series.
Yeah, there you go. And that's the bit with Arias. It felt like everything you saw around the coverage of him was just working on some sort of hitting technique, like from sunrise to sunset. Like Arias was doing something, and that rubbed off on the guys. And I think, to your point, like we saw straight away, Arias, they traded for him. Next thing is you just see Jazz attached to him straight away. Like those two, we're brothers now. We're brothers now. And, Jazz obviously had a bit of a rough ride in the clubhouse prior to that. There's obviously been some documented stuff in that. But, that's the type of example, the type of player that, gets the most out of other guys, gets them to take their level to the next game. It's what you're saying, right? You've got the right type of the right type of example being set. It isn't forced upon you, but you just see, there's a batting champ rocking in here, and this is what he does. So maybe I should try that. That could work for me. And I think it's great to have that type of guy in the clubhouse. I've never heard one bad word said about Luis Arias by any player, coach, anyone. Like, everyone absolutely loves the dude. Yes, he's polarizing on Twitter, seemingly, with every fan base because he can't defend and his war's rubbish and he's got no speed. But man, the dude just hits. And when you think about baseball in its purest form, just hit the ball. Like, good things will come. And Arias he's the best in the business at that, easily.
Yeah, and where it gets down to where you could look at stuff that maybe doesn't work for a certain team based on what they're looking to do. I think the playoffs kind of showed you that you don't necessarily need that traditional first baseman that we've kind of seen teams have in the past, that 30-homer, good defensive first baseman. We saw John Birdie play first base in a playoff game, right? We saw Arias play there. He played maybe an inning or two a second. I can't remember, but he obviously was DH and pretty much playing first base in the playoffs. Yeah. And it didn't affect the Padres negatively at all, when you get down to it. And I remember having conversations with Luis about, because I like to talk to players, the elites, about what they do, the routine and hitting. Like, I noted him, I said, look, what I notice about you is your plate coverage is you could hit pitches up in the zone. You could hit pitch, because some guys, oh, that's a low ball hitter or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously, the fact he rarely strikes out means he can reach all quadrants. But so I said, what do you do? Because I'll look at his swings. I'll look at, man, he's hitting that pitch. Because I'm thinking when I'm watching, I'm kind of in my mind scouting the player as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Garrett Cooper was with the Marlins, I'm like, okay, you could bust him up and in with a fastball and throw him a slider down the way, and that's pretty much how he's always pitched. Bust him up down the way, and you could get him to chase. You kind of saw where the pitch. And it's like if I'm attacking a rise, okay, am I gonna attack him with heavy velo up? Well, he hits that.
Yeah.
Am I going to hit him with sinkers, for right-handed pitch, that pitch down and away or changeup? Well, he hits that too. He covers all quadrants of the plate. And that's why I asked him in batting practice, in cage work, whatever you do. He goes, yeah, I work on it. He works on hitting. And that's, to me, the fun reporting, the fun, relaying the sport for people who are trying to learn the sport, how the greats do that. And you noted something about when it comes to hitting. He's an 80 tool hitter.
Yeah.
So the sport, trust me, there's a lot that obviously the Marlins didn't value it, and whatever they had their philosophical reasons for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of teams that see heavy value in an 80 grade hitter because the hardest thing to find in baseball, one of them are 80 grade hitters. And then when you get to the postseason, the teams that could do more with their at bats, obviously, look, I think what the problem with WAR did and the StatCast over and Fangraphs, the over pushing of the data was it kind of came about with Mike Trout. And then it kind of goes to, Shohei Ohtani or Mookie Betts, or it's like, duh. The eyeballs tell you the 1% is still the 1%.
Yeah.
So year in, year out, they're going to be the highest WAR people. Aaron Judge, just the mass of his talent, his ability, just like Stanton. With Stanton, it's always been staying on the field. Is these guys have so much power. Those guys, the Stantons, the Judges, that they just put the bat in the ball. They can hit balls 400 feet, which makes them so dangerous. But the players that can hit 300 consistently, very, very few to non-existent. And you know why? Because there's this, you're hitting velo, you're seeing velo and spin. Everything right now is a sweeper in 100. Sweeper in 100. That's where Peter, that's where everyone thinks Peter's this genius. I think he's at my problem with what Peter Bendix is doing with the Marlins is I think it's almost like stats 101. I don't see anything brilliant there. You've made yourself as an organization one-dimensional because you're only looking for, bargain value players that check a box. They literally drafted their first-round pick based on batting practice at a combine because he hit the ball 112 miles an hour or whatever it was. And that's all well and good. I'd love to have a lineup with a bunch of 112-mile-an-hour guys. But there's more to hitting batting practice with StatCast looking at you. You know what I mean? And so
Definitely.
You've almost made yourself one-dimensional looking for that player at the exclusion instead of a fitting part. This Arise worked with Soler. That worked really well in 23. Yep. One guy hit 36, 47 homers, whatever it was. The other guy hit 350. That dynamic. And what did that dynamic do for the rest? Jake Berger was a lot more effective, even though Jake salvaged his season, with a good year. But still, he would have been better with a deeper lineup, obviously. It makes Jazz better. It made Josh Bell better. It made, all the other pieces that made the 03 team, the 23 team, even though it was still a kind of, the Marlins, let's face it, their ballpark and their payroll they're going to kind of be a bottom 5, bottom 10% of, or, the bottom third, I should say, in runs scored. It's just, and they're going to, and consequently, their pitching is going to be tilted a little bit better at home, especially because pitchers could get away with more.
It's just what we expect now, right? We know the offense is always going to be at least bottom half, and in reality, probably bottom third, and the pitching does get the boost as well. It's just what we expect. To your point, like from the way it was constructed by Kim, in 23 with that, Soler Arias combo at the top. Like for that first half of the season, that was the first half. The Marlins were, let's say they ended up 10 games over 500, whatever the number was. I mean, I think it was 14 at one point, but they basically had almost zero offense apart from Arias and Soler, and that was it. They had those two dudes that were absolutely just on fire together. And then they had the starting pitching going, but the bullpen was just elite. And that was the makeup of that team. I looked at the opening day lineup, the offense. I mean, man, oh man, it was, Gene Segura's in there, obviously Garcia's in there. I mean, there was so much dead weight in that offense, but that team, they managed to make it work. They made it click. Unfortunately, in 24, what we saw pretty early on was, 0-9 or whatever it might be. And it was pretty clear this team wasn't going to work. But almost by design, they didn't invest. And I know I've heard you talk about it plenty, Joe, and I was the same covering it on my show.
It's just self-fulfilling. And that's just the thing. It's like, it's easy to say, oh, well, they had a rise, it didn't work. They sabotage it. They didn't want it to work. When you do that and you can't, I'm a big believer. You're either, if you're just do nothing, and really the only thing they did in terms of adding to the roster in terms of what they deemed significant was a $5 million investment in Tim Anderson. And they signed him after spring training started. And it almost seemed like just to shut people up that they didn't sign a free agent. So if you're not going for it, you're going backwards.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's even the Dodgers. If the Dodgers just stay pat, they probably, as great as they are, they're going to have to tweak a bit because that's just the nature of it. Jack McKeon told me that after the Marlins won in 03. He says, you always have to, you don't bring exactly the same team back. It's just, it too much has to go right. That doesn't mean you don't have a core. That doesn't mean you have the pieces that obviously the Dodgers aren't going to lose Ohtani and Freddie and Mookie and those guys. But, they're going to have to change the dynamic up a little bit because it doesn't just bottle itself exactly the same way.
No.
But, and this, I want to ask you about this because I think fandom is important, is for any professional sports team. Obviously, baseball is the game that's played more than any other. There's 162 games plus 30-something spring training games. That continuity, at least to have some level of stability of your roster, is very important. I think this is what's biting Bendix in the butt right now in terms of finding a manager. You can't just have you can't fire 70 people and have a manager like Skip leave the year after you push Kim out and then say, come to Miami.
Yeah.
Because everybody, these are the best of the best. They're like, even if I like Miami and I wanted to work down there, and I even think he might have some decent ideas, how can I invest anything in them when I'm just a springboard? They could fire me. I could win manager of the year or executive of the year and still get fired after 1 year. And then the day I want to get paid, they're going to say, well, we don't pay anybody. So that's the thing. Talk about fandom and what you feel about that. Maybe I'm wrong, but you tell me what you think.
No, I think, going through 24 in particular, like the first year of Bendix and this approach, it started poorly and they started to make some moves and it was what it was. But when you look at how things transpired after the deadline, it almost became like, it was almost a joke, frankly. The roster construction and the moves and everything going on, like, I get it. It's kind of the time to just claim everyone off waivers and just see if anyone's any good, frankly, which is seemingly the approach. But as a fan base, you've got nothing. There's no anchor remaining. There's just no anchors remaining for you as a fan base to understand, okay, this is who the Marlins are. At this point, we have no idea who the Marlins are, and the fan base have no one to connect with at this point. Let's see what they do. But the reality is, the most exuberant player in the league of Jazz is gone. They moved him for what I believe I think that's the worst deal they made last year, actually, in terms of the return itself. I think it was a terrible deal. We'll see that in the future. Yeah. They moved Arias, fan favorite, player favorite, everyone. Like, all of the good has been moved. And as a fan base, what do you do at that point? Who do you attach to? I came into it as a fan, and I sat there and watched Stanton hit this massive home run, and it inspired me. I was inspired, Joe, to walk up and go and buy a jersey there and then. it was probably $100, you know, adjusted for inflation. It was probably $200 thinking about it now. But nevertheless, you know, that's what I need. I look at it now and I'm watching on the field and thinking, who's inspiring my son? And I've got to be frank, there's no one. You know, I know that there's a little bit of, you know, Marlins PR that goes behind like a Connor Norby because, you know, we want him to be good. But there's no one there, Joe, that inspires anyone in the fan base right now that gives them, you know, that level of feeling. And so that's the difficult thing is the Marlins have really stripped it down and they're starting from scratch effectively now, really, right? And so we're going to see what happens in the next couple of years. Clearly, Sandy remains on the roster for now. For how long? Who knows? But apart from that, we're looking around and there's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes and prospects, frankly. That's what the Marlins is. And, you know, do you buy into that? I don't know.
It's hard. It's hard. And I've seen it, Peter, because I've done this for over 20 years, more than, you know, some of these, you know, the younger fan that just kind of wants to buy into an analytics or think that this approach is a great approach and just give it time to percolate. What they miss is this isn't a fantasy baseball team. They almost seem to operate as such. And we're in a society now when we're a changing culture of before, like Peter, on top of that, their TV deal's gone. The Bally's deal, let's say they're making $50 million. I think that was the number. Whether it becomes FanDuel instead of Bally's, FanDuel Network, I think is what they're talking about. But I haven't seen that the Marlins have been part of that. That what's that number going to be? It's going to be 10 million. That's going to affect payroll even more. And then, like right now, for full transparency, I didn't watch the Marlins the final 3 weeks of the year because I had DirecTV, which had Bally's. And it basically, they had that ABC ESPN strike thing. They had the contract impasse right about the time college football was starting. And I was giving it a week, and I'm not just going to jump ship right away, but it was going 2-3 weeks. And my wife and I'm like, you know what? College football is starting. I'm not going to miss all these games. And we pulled the plug and we got YouTube TV. Well, YouTube TV doesn't have Bally's.
Right.
So I didn't see the Rays or the Marlins like the last 3 weeks. I was following them on, you know, the app, but I didn't actually put eyeballs on them for 3 weeks. And then it's like, well, let's say now the Marlins have given me, in 4 years we might be good. Well, you get this generation. We already have young kids. I got a 14-year-old granddaughter who doesn't watch network television. She's on social media all the time. She's on TikTok. She's on this, and she's interacting with her friends. And you're getting a generation of baseball players who aren't watching, per se, a lot of baseball. I do high school football, the same thing. They play football. They play baseball. They don't watch it.
No.
So the Marlins now, you don't have the history of the Yankees, the history of the Dodgers to say, guess what? We're watching. Oh, you know what? It's part of the fabric of our community. And so this generation, and I get it, they want to attach to the younger generation. How are they doing that when you're putting a potential 100-loss team back-to-back in place? And you mentioned a guy like Connor Norby, who has some talent, who can be a halfway decent player, maybe even an all-star level player. We don't know.
No.
It's going to be a reach to say that. But the problem with it is, Peter, and because I've seen way too many prospects ruined by this, we overinflate them. They hit 2 homers in the game, and now all of a sudden the pressure's on. We did this to Isan Diaz. There are people saying he had all this power because he had the 25 homers, whatever, in minors that year during the first or so of the rebuild when they brought in all those guys. I remember the next year in spring training talking to Isan, and he's talking about being a 30-30 player. And I didn't say it to him because I had too much respect for him, but I'm like, I want to tamper it down a little bit, you're just, and I get it, Jazz would talk, I'm going to be a Hall of Famer. Okay, it's just Jazz. You'd rather be confident now. But you got to kind of pump the brakes on it because next thing you know, you go from being a 25, 30 homer minor leaguer to out of the game
I know.
within 3 years because you were either rushed, you basically weren't able to handle, the expectation ruined Brinson, Monte Harrison, all those guys. Part of that trade is, it was just, it was like all trying to live up to something,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
none of them were
that's it.
there. And you're also, it'd be a little, what would a guy like Brinson, Graham Brinson had problems with his swing. He may never have really panned out. But if he would have been on a better team that wasn't counting on him to be a savior, may have salvaged a Cameron Maybin type of career where he ended up having some pretty darn good years.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed with Prince. Like I think he's spoken about that. He probably spoke to you about it as well, Joe. The reality that he did feel that pressure. I've heard him speak about it. I'm certain of it, to say that he comes into the organization. He's the big headline guy and a big deal, and he feels he needs to like put the team on his back, and he's a rookie, and it's it was flawed really. But I just wanted to go back, Joe, just what you're saying before, just to kind of call it out. I think baseball generally as a viewing experience has got some really interesting decisions to make in the coming years. It really does, because listen, again, I'm a British guy that hasn't grew up with the culture of baseball and a 162 season and everything. Like, trust me, when I explain to people here, family and friends, and they say, "Oh, Pete, you're doing this podcast, great. You're covering the Marlins, great. Okay, great." And I say to them, they play 162 games, regular season games a year. They fall off their chairs when I tell them that. They're like, 162 games. And it's the funny thing, and this is the point, you've got an attention problem and you've got a lack of juice, Joe. This is the problem. You see this in the postseason. Everyone's going, man, the postseason was great. Why was it great? Because the games mattered. And frankly, in baseball now, we've got an audience that is distracted by other things, and there's too many meaningless games in baseball now that just drags along. There's not enough juice regular enough, and that's the problem with baseball. And years ago in the UK and in England, they had this same dilemma with cricket, where cricket as a 5-day offering for a game, a 5-day match, it became too long. The audiences started to drift away. So what do? We're going to introduce 1 day. We're going to introduce 2020. We want more action and shorter spurts. I'm very, very interested to see baseball, like long-term, next 20 years, 10, 20, does 162 morph into something different? Or sooner than that, maybe. I don't know, because there's a lot of challenges baseball are facing into right now. You're talking about all the broadcasting aspects of this. I know there's a lot of history ingrained in the sport, and there's, it's wrong of me as a British guy to start suggesting changes to America's pastime, clearly, but the culture has changed, and 162 at a slow pace isn't really what the audience wants anymore, the younger audiences anyway, and that's the dilemma that this game faces.
Well, I think, as someone who worked for the league for 18 years at MLB.com, and I used to have these discussions with a lot of people. See, I'm not a big believer in the casual fan, because it was always like, let's market. Okay, if I'm a marketing person, oh well, we just want the casual fan. And baseball has done this. They have every year at the winter meetings, they'll have the minor league and they'll have job seminars. And they had people like, if you want to get hired as a minor league person, they literally told people, because I know people that went to these, these conventions and they said, you don't have to be a baseball fan to work here. So you get all these people, they come in, they have no idea anything about the sport, and they get hired. And they tell people, oh, I work for the Yankees, I work for the Dodgers, I work for the Cardinals, whatever. And they don't know the game, and they're encouraged not to. And why? And I'm going to tell you why I'm not a believer in the casual fan is because what's going to happen in tough times, casual fans first to leave. But what I am a big believer is in the kind of educating and creating more Peter Pratt's, more diehard fans. See the difference? Which is, don't water down your product, double down in why it matters, double down in selling the message, and try to convince those, because you're never really going to appeal to everyone. Think of all and we, as the internet has kind of shown us, and I don't know, we'll talk about what you're doing next, but this YouTube channel, even where I'm kind of like, my audience has kind of found good highlights of high school kids. And when I do podcasts like this, it's still an acquired taste. It doesn't automatically push the big numbers. Well,
Yeah.
I could do two things. I could just say, I'm not going to podcast, or I could just keep providing the content and hoping that it resonates as well. But point being is you have to kind of narrow in. And if you're in on baseball, your people that work for you, if you're going to be MLB, the people, need to be the smartest baseball people that work for your company. They need to be the ones, delivering the message the best with maybe the biggest audiences, not just those who, oh, wow, he's got a million followers, and he says all these weird things. He's not really educating anyone. He's just mildly humorous. And people follow that, but they aren't really following the sport to that level, if that makes any sense. So I think it's almost a strategic thing. And that's kind of like, this is my, as I'm seeing, if my brand grows, and it has been, I really have launched this in mid-February, and I have I think I just hit 2.3 million viewers since February. Now, a lot of those are people who see my shorts and things. I've had a couple of shorts be a couple 100,000, that type of stuff. But what does that tell you is if I could get a high school kid and give exposure to them and have the same audience as an Ethan Holiday highlight or much bigger, maybe there's something to this grassroots. Maybe there is something to, kind of figuring it. And then the challenge for the major leagues, quit going what you think people want and do what you do best, which should be baseball, and let the chips fall where they may. Because I think that's what happens is you end up losing your diehard fan.
Yeah.
And, people who love the sport the most because, you went with this, let the kids play, which is great. But to the overboard of it where they play and next thing you know, they're doing all sorts of stupid stuff and they're pissing everybody off and they're, but your balls being thrown at players and all this weird stuff's going on. And nobody's like, you're like, that's not, I don't even recognize what I'm watching anymore. It'd be like going over to British soccer and just changing it all, Americanizing it. Let's do this. Oh, wait, 1-0. No one wants to see a 1-0 game. Come on, we got to do something. Got to get the ball in the net. Let's make the field 80 yards instead of, or the goal, whatever it is, 18 feet wide, make it 30 feet wide, whatever. Just we got increased scoring. So it's just a bunch of rule changes.
Yeah. Well, we've seen a little bit of that from in baseball recently as well, I guess, right? They're trying to get a little bit more action into the game and speed up the pace and whatever. And I think, as a viewing experience, I must say, man, some of these games really rattle along at a fast pace. I mean, you realize you're in the 7th inning, you've only had 2 beers. You're like, oh dear, like, what's going on? I told my wife I was going to be 4 hours watching this game. But anyway, I'm with you. So I just think it's an interesting time, but it's a good call out, though, that, there will always be the diehards. And to your point, how do you cultivate more diehards? And I think a lot of that comes from, the organizations running themselves in the right way to cultivate the diehards. And this is kind of where we get back to from a Marlins perspective and a fan base perspective. I've heard from tons of guys this year who've said to me, I am a diehard, but I'm not watching the games anymore this year. Like I've tuned out. And this Marlins approach they've taken this year has turned me off. And it's not what I'm here for. I don't recognize the roster. The team is not good. And that's what we need to avoid as well in baseball is incentivizing teams to lose. And that's one of the things that, again, from a British perspective, if you're rubbish, you get relegated and you go down to the next division and the money there isn't there for you anymore that was. There's an incentive to win. Unfortunately, in baseball and US sports, often there's an incentive to lose. And that really is the only ones that really feel that are the fans, to be honest with you, where they're giving an under par product for a sustained period.
That's the thing. That kind of was shocking to me when Bendix came in, when Kim, the whole situation with Kim, which was, I don't really want to get too much into it, but there was more going on behind the scenes. There was some backstabbing going on as well, and she kind of was sabotaged. But okay, you made it in 23, and you knew you were kind of a flawed roster. You knew Sandy was hurt, whatever, but you still had this window. And you still had enough players under club control. You still had a very good bullpen, all of them other than Tanner Scott, that were under club control. And you didn't even try to, okay, maybe we'll keep it intact. Maybe we'll go sign a free agent pitcher. Maybe, there were some out there. You could have gone out and signed it. And brought back Soler and kept the rise and just kind of gone a little bit, for it because the game basically the extra wild card was created to avert tanking.
Yeah.
And you would have thought, but Peter Bendix convinced Sherman tanking was the way to go. And I guess I think they kind of fudged the attendance figures to try to get it to about 1.3 million at the end so they could say, well, you see, we lost 100 games. Last year we went to the playoffs. We essentially drew the same number. Well, you're giving $7 tickets away to see Ohtani. I mean, so, whatever, however you want to slice it, if it makes you feel good, to do that. But the problem is you didn't grow your fan base. You didn't give it a chance to say, I'm a Marlin fan. We went to the playoffs. Maybe it was a little smoke and mirrors, but we still went there. Let's see what we can do and legitimately try again because the rules are set up. There's a lot of marginal teams. There really are a lot of marginal teams. It's not like you have to be super great to get to the playoffs.
No.
So they end up just blowing it, losing more goodwill, setting back another rebuild, which is stuff people don't want to hear. The people don't want to hear patience. They don't want to hear in 3 or 4 years to be what? 3 or 4 years to be what you were in 23? And now you're out looking for a manager to basically be who Skip Schumacher was because you couldn't retain him. It's all such a bad look for them, and it's sad. And as someone, for those who think I'm hating on the Marlins, no, I love the Marlins more than probably anyone because I have more invested. Over, I probably in the history, Peter, with no exaggeration, have written more stories about the Marlins than anybody in the history of the organization.
I wouldn't doubt that,
20
Joe.
years doing it. I was writing 4 stories a day for 18 years. I saw 4 me and Clark Spencer there. We saw a number of rebuilds. Now we had another one that was. And again, it's a different culture, a different, the younger people think that the numbers will solve it all, even though everyone looks at the same numbers.
That's what I mean.
Look at the same numbers. And there's no one, and I know this. And if there's any advice that Peter Bendix gives, no one's going to outsmart the league.
No.
It's just you don't outsmart it. I've seen people think that, and when you do, you usually have a smugness, and it'll turn. It doesn't mean you can't have a lightning in a bottle year and you go and maybe you go a little further than you thought and then you could say I told you so, but it really did not do the market any favors, and that's what really pains me as somebody who, because I had opportunities to go elsewhere and cover baseball, and I had agents of prominent players when they were like, say, hey, Joe, if you need me to help talk in another market, we get you to a real place. And I was like, no, my family lives in South Florida. We wanted to work down here. And if I go cover another team, I'll be the 2000th writer. Here I had a chance to at least be somewhat of, one of the all-time, be part of growing something. And that's why what I'm doing now with this podcast and this channel is trying to grow the sport in a way. Hey, we're going to get out of here in a little bit. We only have a few minutes to go. Tell people what you're doing. I haven't seen your podcast situation. Are you going to be doing podcasts? Let our audience know what's going on.
Yeah, at the moment, I remain a free agent, Joe. So we'll see. 3 years with Locked On was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it in many ways. And, a daily show covering the Marlins from the UK, trust me, was an undertaking, but one that I enjoyed. And for me, just was delighted by the feedback I had. People messaging or I guess more publicly on Twitter talking about it, but people enjoyed the show. So for me, that was a great bit of feedback there, which I've enjoyed. At the moment, I haven't got any specific plans, but what I wanted to do is to just take a little pause, because with Locked On, there's no breaks, right? You're daily, 12 months of the year. And I just needed a bit of time away, to be honest, like just doing other things for a little bit. As you know, Joe, I'm like you, where I love covering the Marlins and I love this form. I'm not a written form kind of guy. I love podcasting and talking about the Marlins. So I'm convinced I'll be back doing something, but I don't quite know what that is at this point. It may be my own show. I may fire something back up. We'll wait and see. But at the moment, there are 0 plans in the pipeline. I remain a free agent, and we will see what happens as we get into 2025. I think 2025 is going to be an interesting year for the Marlins, but I think it's going to probably look quite similar to 24 in all reality from an on-a-field product perspective. So it's probably not going to be the easiest year. But nevertheless, we'll talk a lot of prospects, I guess, and the usual things. But yeah, we'll wait and see, Joe. It's one of them watching briefs where I'm sure I'll be back doing something. And the one thing I would say is it's a little bit disappointing, and maybe it's conducive to what's happened on the field, right? Because I think back to 2, 3, 4 years ago, whenever it was, just how many Marlins podcasts were there then? There was like 10 knocking around. People starting podcasts, talking about the Marlins. Everyone had their own little niche or their niche, depending on whether you're UK or British or American. And now I look around and it's all gone. Everyone's gone, really. There's only a handful now that remain, which again is indicative of what the market's saying as well. Like, people are losing interest in the Marlins at this point, which is sad, frankly. But I'm going to find a way to get the mic fired back up in 25 and inject some energy back into this Marlins organization.
No, I mean, you're the one that brings it. And that's what, if there's any takeaways, my audience gets from listening to Peter Pratt, I hope they realize, and this is as an authentic person that you're going to get who genuinely his heart's in the right spot. I know my heart's in the right spot on this stuff, and then it's like it's about, like you say, you want to be part of something, you want to be proud of it, and you want to build something. But I will say this, Peter, whatever you do, I'm sure it will be successful. And what I recommend, if not that you need my recommendation, but if you do go the YouTube channel route, you can have a lot of fun, man. I that's one thing I did. There's someone who'd been under people, and I had a great time. My MLB.com job, greatest job in the world. It put me in a position financially where I didn't have to do anything the rest of my life. But it was also, the opportunity to be my own boss is very liberating and very much, when you hear other people, if you could find something where you're answering to you, that's the way to go. And then your voice could be even more powerful and share a vision. And that's like what I'm doing here at Man on Second is, trying to buck some myths that, you have to be a certain way to build an audience or to do it. And, no, there is no one way. And if you can provide a little slice of entertainment and information, then go for it. But with that, any closing thoughts as we get out of here?
Oof, man, closing thoughts are, it's been a tough year as a Marlins fan base, I think it's fair to say. And I appreciate you, Joe, as well. Like, to be honest with you, I think it's been a fun experience on Twitter. Man, oh man, Smoking Joe was taking it to a new level this year, and it's been fun to watch as well as an observer of that as well. So, I think it's going to be very interesting. This is a very, very interesting year for the Marlins because there's some big decisions to make, I think, this offseason. I'm very intrigued to see the way it goes. I think it's a poor indication about the manager situation of what's recently occurred, where effectively, you've got candidates pulling out now, an unwillingness to come to the Marlins, which is a super poor indication, to be honest with you. Not everyone's fully on board with this Peter Bendix approach. That's what we're seeing. Yeah. People in the game aren't fully on board with that. There's a lot of fans that are. Frankly, the fan base just has to accept it at this point. We've just got to get on board with it. But I think we're interesting observers. And, I just want the team to hover around 500 next year for longer than, they were out of it within a week this year. So
it's not a good place to be.
No, absolutely. But Joe, keep doing what you're doing, mate. It's great to hear that you're, building the fan base as you are and building the engagement, which is great to see. So keep doing your thing. And I'm always a fan as well.
I appreciate that, Peter. And we will have you back and track whatever you are doing next. But I'm really happy Peter Pratt has joined us today. And I hope our audience got a good taste of a different perspective, and it's enlightening. And I think the people who are authentic, our voices, we bring something to the table. And with that, we're gonna check out here. Obviously, please subscribe to the channel, follow all the content, and we'll keep you posted on what Peter's doing as well. And with that, we'll catch everybody